Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Jessica Clemons, and last week, How to Train Your Dragon reached the top spot on both domestic and global charts. The live-action remake of the beloved 2010 animated movie did an excellent job of capturing the original's charming tone and emotional depth, although it does closely follow the same visual style shot for shot. What initially began with skepticism and some pushback for looking identical to the original ultimately worked remarkably well in my opinion. In this video, we will explore how they made this work, whether live-action animation remakes are actually in now, and everything in between. But first, this video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes launching your own website a breeze. Be sure to check out nerdriot.shop, where you'll find the latest and greatest in New Rockstars merch. Right now, you can grab a shirt inspired by the biggest movie of the summer. I'm talking Fantastic Four, or Superman, or even Jurassic World. See what I did there? Thought I was gonna choose one of the three, but all three of them are the biggest summer, blockbusters. You get it. Grabbing some merch over at nerdriot.shop is the best way to support the channel and look great doing it. Alright, let's get into it. The movie follows the same storyline. A boy named Hiccup, the son of village chief and respected dragon slayer Stoic, lives in the Viking village of Berk, where dragons are considered a threat. Instead of killing a dragon, Hiccup ends up befriending one, realizing that perhaps dragons are not the enemy, they're simply animals acting to protect and defend themselves. The film challenges traditions, fosters friendships, demonstrates courage, and embraces acceptance as Hiccup embarks on a journey of self-discovery with his new best friend. His goal is to change the beliefs of those around him regardless of the obstacles he must face. And this remake was written and directed by Dean Debla, who wrote and co-directed the original How to Train Your Dragon alongside Lilo & Stitch creator Chris Sanders. Crazy that both their movies are still in theaters. In the movie stars Mason Thames from Black Phone, Nico Parker, who you might have seen in The Last of Us, Gabriel Howell from Netflix's Bodies, Julian Dennison from Deadpool 2, Bronwyn James, who you might have seen in Wicked, Harry Trevelyan, Peter Serafinowicz, who you might have seen in Guardians of the Galaxy, and Nick Frost, who you know, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, everything. And it also stars Gerard Butler reprising his role as Stoic, whom he played in the animated films. Immediately, I felt that the actors were perfectly cast, mainly because they can explore heightened levels of emotion that we only really experience through dialogue in the animated movie. In moments of silence or through their expressions, the actors' performances carry much of the weight in the film. Dean also spoke about other actors like Gerard, whom they might have considered bringing back from the 2010 cast, using David Tennant as an example. And the role for David Tennant wasn't really big enough to warrant his return, and the character is much more brawny, which famously, you know, David Tennant is not. However, How to Train Your Dragon's remake did something I haven't seen other live-action remakes do. It made no significant changes. Okay, now stay with me. The primary issue with live-action animated remakes, other than their overuse of CGI or just general audience fatigue, is the backlash when they stray from the source material. However, sticking too closely to the original can make the remake feel pointless. Finding the right balance between those two extremes is really challenging. It's almost like a double-edged sword. It's natural to make some adjustments, considering how much technology and/or its original tone could have evolved in the past 15 years, or if you want to expand on the original ideas. However, people might get upset if they feel too many changes have diminished the original spark. What they added to the live action didn't diminish the original film's spark. The first film was put together in just 15 months, which forced them to rush through certain aspects of the story to maintain the overall scale. This time, the creator had the opportunity to envision the project as he always intended, resulting in a version that is very, very close to the original. It simply deepens a few character storylines and expands the world without being too distracting, which I rarely see in live action remakes. Reviewers have both praised and condemned the new How to Train Your Dragon, yet both ends of the spectrum share one common critique: how it follows the original movie shot for shot, which admittedly it does. It does, for sure. While this approach may be hard to appreciate for those who want an adaptation to bring some new creative elements, again, deviating from the original material wouldn't make viewers happy either. While they could have opted to use material directly from the book, would the 2010 animated film have more of an appeal? Although they could have chosen simply to just not make it at all, Universal would have likely moved forward with the project regardless of the creatives involved, because these live action animated remakes make money regardless of how we all feel about them. In 2016, Universal's parent company acquired DreamWorks Animation, and they insisted that the new film should appeal not only to a young audience, but also to adults who had grown up to the original ones, as well as those who are just now hearing about it for the first time. The best outcome in this situation, where studios will adapt your cherished IP, is to take as much creative control as possible and make it as the original How to Train Your Dragon co-director and writer Dean did. Still, he didn't feel that way 5 years ago, and people like to bring this back up. In 2020, when asked about the rising trend of live-action remakes of animated films, Dean told Variety, "I'm not interested in them. I just think it's lazy on the part of the studio." But that idea sort of changed, of course, when Universal Pictures president Peter Kramer called Dean asking if he'd be interested in directing a live-action version. He chose between, and I quote, "to sit here and pout and watch somebody else do it, or I could jump in and shoulder the blame or help change the narrative." The new movie challenges the narrative that live-action remakes are pointless, and he's trying to show us that they can actually still be very meaningful. And look, I agree with most of you. I'd love for studios to just stop touching animated movies and turning them into live actions, but they just won't so long as they can make big money off them. So we're handling the best of a tired situation, and retaining that creative control from the original storytellers is simply all I can ask for right now. However, I did enjoy How to Train Your Dragon's live action. I genuinely did. I really liked this movie. The transition from the animated story to a live action film felt really smooth because the animated movie felt more aligned with a live action movie, which was their original intent. Dean told Hollywood Reporter they always chase live action aesthetic in the animated films. The only added measure to reinforce their live action feel was the advancements in VFX since 2010. That made the desired look of these dragons very cool, so thank you, Game of Thrones. When creating the dragons for the franchise, Dean collaborated with animation supervisor Glenn McIntosh, who had previously animated dinosaurs for the Jurassic Park and Jurassic World franchises. The goal in this movie from Dean was to make them as close to like real dinosaurs, or to feel as real as dinosaurs would, as much as possible. It's June, and I know a lot of you out there are new grads who are trying to figure out how to put your book learning to use in the real world. You gotta put yourself out there, whether you're starting a business or just looking for work. Ignore your parents' advice about getting a nice business card made. Yeah, get that out of here. What you need is a website, and Squarespace is the best way to go about building one. Squarespace is the all-in-one tool that gives you everything you need to make a website that looks good and does whatever you need it to do. Every Squarespace website is optimized to be indexed with meta descriptions, and auto-generated sitemap, and more, so you show up more often to more people in a global search engine result. If you're not a graphic designer, don't worry. Squarespace Design Intelligence tool makes it so easy to get your website looking just right. It combines 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise with cutting-edge AI technology. If you're selling goods or services, Squarespace can also help you untangle digital payment platforms with just a few clicks, making it super easy to start receiving payments right away using popular payment methods like Apple Pay, ACH Direct Debit, Klarna, and more. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/newrockstars to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Each dragon breed is inspired by specific traits of real-life animals. For example, the deadly Nada, like Stormfly, takes influence from the winged arms of a bat, the head of a parrot, and the legs and talons of a golden eagle. In contrast, since the animated movie, Toothless has always been 75% Black Panther and 25% Salamander. However, he underwent significant updates in the live action, with animators dedicating 2.5 years to his development. As the New York Times noted in their interview with Dean, the more cartoonish expressions like raised eyebrows were swapped out for head tilts or tail swishes that mimic those of a curious dog or a cat. They realized Toothless's eyes were also just way too big, bigger than any animals on Earth, so they had to shrink them down to a more realistic proportion, but then they kind of lost the character. I presume they landed on what we got in the movie at the end, which is great because we could have had Ugly Sonic again. They went from a 90-minute animated movie to a 125-minute live-action movie, hence they get more time to work in small spaces we didn't see in the original. Circling back to the original movie, where they had kind of a rush job, they wanted to explore and heighten significant moments they couldn't before. Like with scenes where Stoic rallies the troops is much more dense and longer, including more significant characters charting their history and allegiance to their clan. We also didn't see the trip to the fog in the first movie. It was implied that it just didn't go well upon their return, but now we feel the stakes since we're seeing the stakes. There's also more time with Stoic and Hiccup. Their solo conversations are more heightened and theatrical. Astrid and Hiccup's added beef during the book scene, which we didn't get to see, along with the much longer moment in the tunnel with Astrid and Hiccup before the trial. Dean reflected on the flaws he observed in the first movie, particularly those that others overlooked. One of his main concerns was the lack of development for the teenage characters, especially Astrid. Jeffrey Katzenberg, the former head of DreamWorks Animation, often reminded Dean to prioritize younger audiences by stating, "Don't forget the 5-year-olds," and I presume as a result, the teenage perspective in the film stayed kinda superficial. Dean aimed in this movie to provide Astrid with a deeper backstory to explain her intense resentment towards Hiccup and his position of privilege, which again doesn't distract or pull away from the original tone of the movie. It just gives her a better, more justified motivation. In this movie, Astrid shares her desire to be chief one day, which wasn't explored in the original movie. There are more scenes from the animated film that didn't make it into the movie as well, like Hiccup being attacked by the terrible terrors on the beach after his test drive flight. There's also a scene where Astrid almost catches him in the blacksmith stall at night with Toothless, which they removed. This is because they felt the storytelling was coming through loud and clear with the actors' performances. They didn't have to lean on these finer points in these scenes, which helped keep the pace moving along. Although the similarities from the original still shine through, they're exceedingly replicated at very special moments, so the devout fans get to stew in them a little bit longer. For example, when Hiccup and Toothless fly together above the clouds and become detached, both are set to John Powell's incredible score. John Powell is a film composer and conductor who has composed music for films like Face Off and X-Men: The Last Stand, and was nominated for 2 Academy Awards for Best Original Score for the original How to Train Your Dragon and Wicked. He returns, giving us Test Drive. one of the most iconic soaring melodies that burst through in moments that could bring a tear to anyone's eye. The visuals in this adaptation should also resemble those of the original, as they serve as anchor scenes. Just as you wouldn't remove a whole new world from Aladdin's remake, key moments like the first touch, the test drive, and the romantic test drive feel essential to the movie and better be included. So does this movie succeed simply because it stays true to the source material? Well, no. Just because a film closely follows its original story doesn't guarantee it will resonate 15 years later. For instance, the live-action remake of Snow White has drawn critiques, as many journalists point out that not as many people are excited about a story that's nearly 100 years old and lacks cultural relevance for today's audience. And I find that argument very valid. In contrast, How to Train Your Dragon benefits greatly from being a fresh contemporary story from the very beginning, and it's also not 100 years old. Remember, How to Train Your Dragon was initially released in 2010 and has remained in the public's eye since then, thanks to 2 additional animated feature films, several short films, a TV series, and a video game that expanded its universe. They've now opened a bigger park at Universal inspired by this franchise that used designs from the live-action movie. Regardless, these achievements would mean little without the compelling, heartwarming pet and human fantasy adventure story that originated from the first film all those years ago. The first movie dropped a few months after the first Avatar debuted in theaters, and the Chronicles of Narnia reached its 3rd film by now. Essentially, this is at a time when family fantasy movies were skyrocketing. And if you look back at what was released in 2010, it was a lot of family hits. Shrek Forever After, Tangled, Toy Story 3, Alice in Wonderland, and the first Despicable Me movie. Family adventure movies were very popular then, but there's a reason they chose to adapt How to Train Your Dragon as the studio's first launch into live-action adaptations of animated films. According to the New York Times, executives chose this property over, say, Shrek or Despicable Me because of the human and creature drama at the center of it. I'd even argue with that, the collective desire to explore and travel beyond one's home in search of something more or greater, this desire to embark on adventures and immerse yourself in the fantastical worlds, is also a timeless selling theme. So are live-action remakes making a comeback, or were they ever truly popular in the first place? Is How to Train Your Dragon the film that will set a new standard for doing them well? Well, that's the complex issue, as each live-action remake seems to have a different impact. Simply taking a popular IP and converting it to a live action isn't a difficult risk. It can also be kind of disrespectful to the original creators who poured their hearts and souls into that project years ago. On the other hand, these remakes can serve as nostalgic introductions for newer generations. Unfortunately, since the studios focus more on profit over art, allegedly I should say, since most studios are focusing on profit over art, until then we have to hope they always return to the creatives that built that original dynasty all those years ago. And I think How to Train Your Dragon did a really good job with Dean returning, who knows the world better than anyone else without sacrificing it and celebrating its original animated movie. Now, to be honest, this worked in Dean's favor, which is a rarity because he's both directing and writing. Sometimes studios just give you a choice or they just do it without you. On top of that, this is Dean's first live action feature film, so there was a lot of faith and trust from Universal on that part. So this initiative and risk is an additional step the studios would have to take in order to make something similar. I think live action remakes have never really gone away. They've been making them, no matter how much we don't always like them. However, How to Train Your Dragon might be a good movie to take note of. Disney. What? The wind's blowing and saying names now. You know, maybe just take note of them because Tangled is somewhere disappearing now, and I think it's because Snow White was a bust. From the sounds of it, it looks like Universal will be making a second movie following this one. According to Dean during CinemaCon, they seemed very excited to announce the sequel, but he was reluctant, wanting to wait it out and see if folks even enjoyed it first. It's unsurprising to see a second movie being made, seeing as the original was the first of a trilogy. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, Dean said in regards to working on the second movie, "Now it's the tackling the story, and that's a weird thing for me because I wrote the story for How to Train Your Dragon 2, the animated movie, and I'm proud of these movies, and so I have to really be objective and stand back and say what could be done better." He then teases that, like this first live action film, the sequel will be a faithful recreation of its animated predecessor, something that Universal has always encouraged. And that's it for my breakdown on the live action remake of How to Train Your Dragon. Y'all, I liked it. I liked it. It's very sweet. I'm not even sugarcoating it. It pleasantly surprised me. However, I will say How to Train Your Dragon wasn't my Shrek. It wasn't even my Princess and the Frog, but I still recognize its importance to its fan base, and I hope that for an already planned live action remake, this was good enough for y'all. I hope you really enjoyed it. Comment down below your thoughts on How to Train Your Dragon, and a special thanks to one of our YouTube members, Jeremy Dunham, who supports us at the executive producer level. Follow me at Lulu_Clemons. Subscribe to all 4 channels in the new Rockstars network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching. Go ride a dragon.